Non-Stop Rock Talk with Tyson Bryden. Welcome to Non-Stop Rock Talk. I am your host, as always, Tyson Bryden. On today's show, I'd like to welcome author Tim Durling. Tim, welcome. How's it going?
It's going really good, Tyson. Thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure. I'm really excited to talk about your books. As I mentioned when we started, as you being an author, but for me, not just an author. I mean, it's not you're playing fiction stuff. This is you have written a few books that are kind of close to my heart and what I assume many of my listeners as well. The 80s being an era that was so important to many of us. So with all that said, let's introduce the books you've written and we can talk about them. The first one, which I thought was really interesting, I guess it's more of a 70s thing, Unspooled, an adventure in 8 tracks. And then we've got Down for the Count, Y&T album review, Let It Be Your Guide, the Kansas album review, Red on Black, the listener's guide to Sammy Hagar, and then Sing Me Away, the Night Ranger album review. So before we get into this stuff, possibly you can give me a little insight into yourself and kind of your vision going into these books.
Sure. I'm a child of the 80s. I was born in 1974, so my musical tastes were shaped by listening to top 40 radio, and as we were talking before we started recording, we're both Canadian, faithful watcher of Muchmusic, which was Canada's MTV. Yeah. Learned so much about all different kinds of genres of music. And I've just always been someone that liked music, loved music, but it was never just background noise for me. I was always interested in, well, who's actually singing, who's actually playing, who wrote this song, who produced it, what label was it on? Like, I always wanted to know more. And that's why I loved listening to, Rick Dees, Casey Kasem, as far as, American radio is concerned, and then Muchmusic whenever they'd have artists on to interview them. I used to love when they would have their daily spotlights where they would play like a half an hour of just one band or one artist or whatever, and just soaking it all in. Even just something as simple as buying a new album and just combing through those liner notes and ingesting all of that information down to the the mastering engineers and the photographers and who they thanked. And you notice, well, this other band thanked them too. I wonder what the connection is. Just kind of putting it all together, it was. So the books are just, even though I had no intentions of writing any books, even as of 5 years ago, was not planning on doing this. They're just an extension of my love for music. The same thing as, the reason I started my YouTube channel, Tim's Vinyl Confessions, in 2014. It's just a way for me to talk about the bands I love, and specifically bands that I don't think get talked about enough, which is, a lot to do with why the subjects of my books are as they are.
Which is amazing. What was the first one you did? The first book?
It was Unspooled, definitely. Unspooled. And actually that book, that's basically a trip through the 80s, even though most people don't think it would be, because a lot of what inspired me to do that book was the fact that I discovered that in the United States, if you were a member of the Columbia House Record Club or RCA Music Service, 8 tracks did not die when they disappeared from store shelves in the early 80s. The record clubs kept most major label titles available all the way through November 1988, which
I did not realize.
That blew my mind when I learned that fact. I learned that sometime back in the 90s. And it was always fascinating to me. Well, what does that mean? What titles were actually released? And of course, before I had internet access all the time, it was harder to find those things out. But it's part of what I do on Unspooled is I keep a list of all known titles that were released by the record clubs that were not released to retail. So albums that most people would think came out long after the 8-track era do exist on 8-track if you were a member of these clubs. For some reason, that just struck me as something that this needs to be documented. It's a part, albeit a small part of music history, but I think all music history should be documented. but it's also a trip through the 80s. There's some autobiographical stuff in there. It's also a book about collecting music and what drives us to collect things. I mean, even if most people collect something, whether it's sports memorabilia, baseball cards or stamps or, why? Because it makes them happy. There's something about that thrill of the chase and tracking down that elusive rare 1971, whatever. It's the same thing, and also, it's always kind of been cool. Vinyl's always kind of been cool. There was never a period where vinyl wasn't cool. 8 tracks have never been cool unless you're sort of doing it in a sort of ironic way. But I love the contrast of people thinking it is a primarily 70s thing, which really, in terms of its commercial popularity, it was. But they had staying power most people don't realize. There was a 3 or 4 year period where they coexisted alongside the CD, which doesn't make any sense. That's like dinosaurs and humans existing on the same time. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, totally.
So that was the inspiration behind that book. And that one actually started as a Kickstarter campaign, did very, very well. And then once I learned that it was possible to do books through Amazon through a print to order process, which meant that I didn't have to have boxes of books sent to me and physically send them out. I brought it over to Amazon, or had it brought over to Amazon, and then the books I've put out ever since then, they've all come out through Amazon. And the nice thing about that is that it doesn't matter what country you live in, it's whatever your local Amazon is. Order it from there, whether it's UK or Australia, and you'll have it within a couple of days. So, and obviously they take the lion's share of the profit, but for somebody like me, who this is not my main job, it works.
Yeah. And I became aware of that a few years ago. Bobby Rock from Vinnie Vincent Invasion.
Yeah.
He did the same process for his book. And I was asking him a bunch of questions in regards to that.
Well, it's funny because, all these things coalesce. So, you're talking about the Vinnie Vincent Invasion, you're kind of in the Kiss world. Well, it was Julian Gill that I talked to when he put out his Mask Hysteria book, which came out through Amazon. And basically, after we were done recording, I said, how did you do that? How does that work?
Yeah.
So really, Julian has a lot to do with this whole process. And actually, Julian contributes a chapter to Unspooled about Kiss collecting in particular, because Kiss collectors are crazy. We are.
Oh, they totally.
Yeah.
And
I'm one of them, right? I'm one of them. So
I am too. I am as well. I've admitted on this show that I have 7 different versions of Creatures of the Night on vinyl.
Creatures of the Night is one of my 8-track grails to track down. As is Lick It Up. I actually have Animalize on 8-track, which is the last known Kiss album to come out in that format. It's a Columbia House version, but I don't have the 2 before it. So, yeah.
Wow. Do you have Unmasked?
I do. I've got The Elder.
That's cool.
I'm just missing Creatures and Lick It Up. Creatures is a retail cart, and Lick It Up is a Columbia House only.
Was Killers released on 8-track?
I don't think so, because 8-track was really a North American thing, and Killers wasn't released in North America in 1982. So, and in like a lot of these discussions, when I talk about, was such and such released on 8-track, my main answer is, as far as I know, no, it wasn't. And so the lists of the 8-tracks in Unspooled are confirmed to exist. There's no guesswork. There's no, I think I saw it once. No, I had to take it from a picture or someone who I trusted implicitly that knows about this stuff and is really into it. And there's people that are more into it than I am. And those are the people that I want to talk to about these things. But the one thing that I wasn't able to do with that Unspooled book is I really wanted to find someone who worked at one of the record clubs in the 80s and find out, number one, why did you keep making 8-tracks when retail stores were no longer making them, and record companies were no longer making them for retail stores? So why did you decide to keep them going? And the next thing is, why did you eventually stop?
Right.
So, but I wasn't able to find anybody in that position. But
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I never thought of that. Like, I had no idea.
Most
for one,
most
because I
normal
mentioned
people wouldn't
the
think of that, Tyson. That's the thing. Most,
Yeah.
it's like, why do you care about this? I don't know why. It's why. Like, again, it's that collecting thing. There's something that is compelling to me about it. There's something that is, having 8 tracks from 85, 86, 87. There's an out of time factor. It doesn't make sense that I have Europe's The Final Countdown album on 8-track. That shouldn't be. But I do. But I do.
That's amazing.
I've got Van Halen's 5150. I've got Fleetwood Mac, Tango in the Night. I've got Journey's Greatest Hits. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But
do you have Shout at the Devil on 8-track?
I don't. That's one that usually goes for hundreds upon hundreds of dollars. Yeah.
Does
yeah.
it? And I'm sure there was Leather Records pressings on 8-track as well.
I don't think so. No, I think that was just vinyl.
No?
But major labels, that service the record clubs, usually made the 8-tracks available. There are some exceptions. Like, I don't seem to see any evidence that there were ever Twisted Sister albums on 8-track. And yet there are a few Rat ones. And they were both on the same label and really very similar audiences, right? So there are these weird anomalies, and it's like, if 8-tracks went all the way through 1988, why was Animalize the Last Kiss one? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Yeah, it is a very, very strange, it's a very strange phenomenon. I wanted to document it. I wanted to get pictures in the book so people could see, this actually happened. These are real. You could see the wear and tear. They're not just photoshopped. Oh, here's an album on 8-track. No, this is real. This was a real thing that if you, anybody that remembers Columbia, you had to select your format. And I did talk to someone who said that their mother was in Columbia House in the 80s, and they kept forgetting to change their preference from 8-track to cassette. So they kept getting all these 8-tracks, and they said, I just wish I'd kept them all sealed, because I could make a fortune now, depending on what titles they were.
No kidding. It's funny you mentioned Columbia House, because I recall my parents did not want me. They wanted no part of me getting involved with Columbia House. So I had a buddy, and I said to him, I was like, why don't we share our membership?
Yeah.
So he's like, yeah, that's a great idea. I said, we'll just ship it to your house, and then, you buy 2 and I'll buy 2, and then we'll fulfill it easily, right? So I just recall in, like, say, Metal Edge magazine or Circus, I can't remember which one it was, they had all the titles I wanted. If it was the one that came in the mail, you were usually getting the titles that were popular, right?
The selection of the month.
One that came.
Yeah.
The selection of the month.
And if you didn't send it back, you'd get it, right?
Right.
So it was...
Yeah, so we went through this thing, and I ended up with, like, I wanted titles like Mr. Big, Pretty Boy Floyd, Babylon AD, and Shotgun Messiah and stuff like that, because even in the record stores here, a lot of that stuff you couldn't just go, unless you went downtown Toronto to Sammy Record Man and buy.
Columbia House, it served a purpose for people in rural areas, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it was amazing. So I wasn't sure if, because it was in Circus Magazine, being an American publication, if I would actually get these titles. Thinking, what, maybe they're not going to send them to me. Maybe they're not available. And lo and behold, they did show up. Oh, Tora Tora was in there as well. Lo and behold, they did show up. And I was, that was like the happiest day of my life at like 15, 16.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I really didn't know anything about Columbia House, because it tended to get talked about in, Columbia House, for some reason. But I do remember that around the turn of the 90s, a friend of my sister's, her father was in Columbia House, but in Canada. So Columbia House Canada was its own division. It was its own thing. And I remember, again, seeing in one of the Circus or Hit Parade or one of those magazines, I was looking for the Best of Vandenberg, which I could not find. And I saw it in a Columbia House ad, and I is that available? But it wasn't in Canada, of course. I didn't know you could actually get it sent. That's cool. But Another thing I should say is that Columbia House in Canada seemed to stop making 8 tracks in 1984. So though they did keep making them a little bit longer than retail, they stopped in 1984 because I've never seen any Canadian ones past 1984. And if you go on Discogs and look for certain titles, they look very, very different to the US ones. Record club tapes look very different to the retail versions. Like you can really tell. Like all the Columbios have CRC on them, and sometimes the whole design of them looks very, very different. But the newest Canadian 8-track I was able to find is Rush Grace Under Pressure, which is from 1984, which is pretty rare. But I've never seen any past that. But that makes me, of course, being up here in Canada and growing up watching Muchmusic, that makes me wonder, well, are there any Helix 8-tracks? I've never heard tell me. Are there any Kim Mitchell 8-tracks? Are there any Honeymoon Suite? Like I've never seen any of those bands. Now we talked about Andy Curran, and something that I told him, which he was not aware of, is that the first Coney Hatch album does exist on 8-track. It was available through Columbia House in Canada. You can see an entry for it on Discogs. I don't have it. It's one of my grails, and he says, now it's one of mine, man. I said, okay, so if I get into a bidding war on eBay with one other person, I'll know who it is.
It would be Andy.
Yeah. But it was my pleasure
funny
to let him know that he did not know, which is pretty cool. Like, when you're talking to somebody in one of the bands, they're like, I had no idea I had anything on 8-track.
That's crazy. I mean, I love Discogs.
It's a really good resource, and I've used Discogs pretty heavily for all of my books to just double check. Like make sure that if it's something I don't physically own and can look at, it's something I can double check to make sure I've got the songwriting credits right, the production credits, all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I got Andy Curran's self-titled on vinyl from Europe, which is hilarious to me.
Yeah, you had to. That's right. Being in Toronto, you had to get. Yeah. That's like trying to find Harum Scaram's albums. You have to get foreign versions of a Canadian band.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've repressed. I mean, I have the first
one. Me too.
Has been repressed, right? But it'd be nice to get those originals as well.
Yeah.
Slick Toxic was never released on.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, they came just like if they'd come out even 2 years earlier, they probably would have had at least one album or even a single or an EP on vinyl. But yeah, they just kind of came too late in the game. The album was released in the States, but it wasn't big enough. They weren't pressing vinyl, and obviously it didn't come out in the UK because they kept making vinyl in the UK and other parts of the world. And it's the same thing with cassette tapes. I know cassettes are making a comeback now, but cassettes kind of disappeared for good on store shelves around 2000, 2001. But for some reason, places like Indonesia and Malaysia and Ukraine kept putting albums out on 8-track. I mean, I've got Poisoned, their covers album from 2007 on cassette. So it's like like the 8-track thing, but 20 years later. Right. The first 2 Darkness albums I've got on cassette.
That's cool.
Yeah, so it's weird what's out there and what isn't out there, and why I collect such a weird format anyway. If I love a band, I want to have their albums, and I want to have their albums on as many formats as I can find. So eventually, that if it's a 70s, 80s band, that's going to lead you to 8-tracks.
Yeah, that's true. That's amazing. Like, I mean, that whole Discogs thing it became interesting to me because talking about stuff that's available in Europe, like for one, I went to Portugal about 5 years ago and I found a vinyl pressing of Ugly Kid Joe's America's Least Wanted.
Wow, yeah.
From right
in a record wouldn't meet too many of those, yeah. But yeah, South American territories and in lots of parts of Europe, they just had them on vinyl just as a regular. It wasn't a special edition or anything. I recently did an episode of my show with my buddy Chris Preston from My Rock and Roll Heaven about original 90s vinyl. We did an episode on singles, and we're going to do an episode's coming up on albums, not represses, but originals. And it's funny how few North American releases there were, or how few that we actually found. It was such a novelty when an album came out on vinyl that was relatively, like when Van Halen Balance came out, they put it out on vinyl. I remember buying that at Sam the Record Man. I'm like, I'm going to buy this. And it turns out, because I've never opened it, it's one of the most expensive records in my collection.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that is. I mean, they re-released it in the box set, but to have
but an original U.S.
original,
I bought it in Canada, but it was a
crazy.
U.S. pressing, and so it was a novelty to have these new albums on vinyl because you didn't see the vinyl was dead. Right now, I didn't join Columbia House until 1993, and by the time I joined, it was all cassettes and CDs. But it really was a really cheap way to fill in the holes in your collection.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I think a buddy of mine actually has the Motley Crue '94 on vinyl from when
Yeah, I have seen a copy of that. I'd love to get my hands on it. I've actually called that my favorite Motley Crue album. I think it's great album.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
I'm totally with you on
great
that.
album.
I mean, I just finished John Corabi's book like 2 nights ago, and there's a lot of talk of, I mean, there's a lot. It was funny reading it because there's a lot of things besides the music on the album of went into why it wasn't successful.
Yeah,
and it wasn't entirely their fault.
No,
and it was,
I think the industry as a whole turned against bands like that.
Yep.
So,
and Elektra Records and whatnot.
Yeah.
But you know what? I could go on and talk about this.
I hear you. I hear you.
Forever.
Yeah.
I mean, and I was talking about the Discogs thing, and I started going in and like finding out, over in Europe, like a band like the Electric Boys, their Funko Metal Carpet album. Yeah. There's a different version, which I found on Discogs with 5 different songs than the American pressing.
Okay, yeah. That happens sometimes. That's like, there's 2 examples I always cite. AC/DC, High Voltage, and Triumph Rock and Roll Machine. What songs are on those depend entirely on what version you have. Is it an album or is it a compilation of a couple of albums?
Right, because High Voltage in North America is a compilation of 2 albums.
High Voltage, what we know as High Voltage, is essentially TNT. Their second Australian album. I think 7 of the 9 songs are on High Voltage, and the other 2 are from the Australian High Voltage, or something like that. And then in Triumph's case, you've got an even split. The Rock and Roll Machine album that came out on RCA and then eventually MCA is like half their first album and half of the second album. I didn't know that until the mid-90s, which it was like, okay, I got to find these, because at that time, like, Triumph had broken up, and I've always been a fan. It's like, well, there's like an album's worth of songs I've never heard.
Mm-hmm. The AC/DC thing's interesting because I think some of the songs on the first High Voltage ended up on 74 Jailbreak.
Totally,
as well.
Yeah, Baby Please Don't Go, and then the AC/DC one is really, really interesting. I think most of those, if you bought the Backtracks box set, that nicely collected those songs and all those together. Rock in Peace and Crapsody in Blue and all, Cold Hearted Man, those Stray songs that we want to hear those.
Yeah, and I'm waiting for these to come. They reissued those 2 Australian.
Yeah,
I ordered them back in the spring, and I'm still waiting for them to come.
I would like to get a vinyl version of the TNT album, because that's the one that there was never a North American album released called that. So
called TNT, yeah. So I mean, I'm waiting for those. It's been 6 months, and it was through Experience Vinyl, and I said, like, when are these coming? And they said October. So
here we are.
Hopefully they come soon.
Yeah,
here we are. They're still not here. And another interesting point about AC/DC is that the cover in Australia for Dirty Deeds is different as well.
Most of those covers are way different. The Dirty Deeds cover is different. Let There Be Rock is different. Even Highway to Hell is different. It's same picture but a different background. Now AC/DC, to give you some context in the 8-track world, there's 2 of their albums I'm missing on 8-track, and those would be Fly on the Wall and Who Made Who, 85 and 86.
And they were available.
I've got Flick of the Switch, which is a Record Club only one. But I need those other 2. And those ones, if they do come up for sale, hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Because AC/DC is still popular. So people collect that band no matter what it is, right? They got to have it. So you're not just dealing with 8-track collectors, you're dealing with fans of whoever it is.
Right. Now, do you have an 8-track player? Do you play these?
That is the fun. Yeah, that's probably the question I get asked the most, because it's like, well, he went through the trouble of writing an entire book. No, the answer is no. I used to. In the early 90s, when I first started collecting, I had a little portable player, and I would actually play them. But you've got to, if you're going to keep these things and play them, you have to put a lot of maintenance work in. You've got to take the tapes apart and change the felt pads, and the players need constant maintenance. They were built to break down. The tapes were made to end up tape spaghetti everywhere.
Yeah.
And I ruined I found a really nice copy of Queen 2, and it got eaten up by my player, and I said, I think I'm just going to collect these and I'll just listen to the CDs.
That's cool. I mean, I think back, like you said, you were born in 74. I was born in 74 myself. So my dad had like a 68, 67 Ford, this big boat convertible, and had the 8-track player, remember the hump where the drive shaft was, mounted in the car.
Yeah. And that's the reason why it was a popular format when it came out. It was the portability. You could install a player and you could listen to whatever you wanted to listen to. You didn't have to wait for a song to come on the radio. And you couldn't take records with you driving around. So 8-tracks were just the portability won out. It wasn't about the sound quality. It wasn't about, say, having the songs in the same order as they are that you're used to hearing, or, having songs that weren't split in two. But, that's why it was so popular. But as the cassette technology got better and better, cassettes obviously took over as that primary portable music medium, which is why a lot of people with 8-track players ended up getting the adapters, which I've got a picture of and unspooled, the little adapter that you laid the cassette down in and plugged that into the player, and it would play the cassette via the 8-track player.
Wow. I remember even in the 90s having a Discman with a cassette hooked to it and putting that in.
That was that was probably my very first quote unquote portable CD player. And I remember that if you hit anything resembling a bump, your CD would stop playing for a couple of minutes. So they got better over time.
Which they did, and then they started putting them in cars. But I mean, if you wanted to listen to your CDs, that was your best option, right?
Yeah. I think everybody that collects physical media at one point has had to deal with the format shift, right? Like when DVDs first came out, there were people like, I've got shelves full of VCR tapes. I'm not buying all these again. So then they'd have those hybrid VCR DVD players for a short time. It was like wrestling with the format shift.
Yeah, no, I mean, thinking back to those days, and I mean, now, it's so easy to listen to a song, right?
Yeah.
But for vinyl guys, and, you have your vinyl for a reason, because that, it's not compressed and you're getting that.
And if you're like me and you're a fan of the artwork and stuff, that's still the best canvas to enjoy it on. Absolutely. And so many of the albums, which we will talk about, especially, the Y&T album covers and the Night Rangers and, and even the Van Halen, the Sammy Hagar stuff. There was so much visual to look at. Yeah.
And a lot of the time when you'd go into the record store, stuff would pop out at you. You'd be like, hey, what is this?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know this band. Like, I'm thinking of, like, for instance, Tesla, Mechanical Resonance, that blue cover. Was just
striking.
It just popped right, striking, right? And they made sure of that.
That was by design. That's why the album cover design was a thriving business. It's like this. We want people this to be the first thing they see when they come in.
Yeah, exactly. With all that said, in terms of the other books, I want to start with Y&T. In that book, I loved when you discussed your first real introduction to the band, because frankly, it was exactly the same for me. I had watched the Summertime Girls. I had seen the video on Muchmusic on the Power Hour. It was in pretty heavy rotation. Then Contagious was on the Power Hour as well, and cool song, but I didn't buy the album.
Yeah.
And then Don't Be Afraid of the Dark comes out, and I go out and I buy the tape of
That
10.
is so cool. Yeah, that was it. I mean, I was aware of the band, but that was right up my alley. I love that sort of melodic hard rock, and I thought, yeah, this is. I knew this was a band that had some history too, so I'm like, okay, this is a band that I can get into. I had no idea how hard it would be to find all of their albums, but they very quickly shot all the way to the top for me, and to this day. On any other day, like if you were to ask me who my favorite band is, it's either Y&T or Rush. I don't know. I can't. Like I said, it's neck and neck.
Yeah.
So, and I usually give the nod to Y&T because so many people just don't know about them. And and I've said it. It's been said in the book by several of us. All people have to do is hear them if they like this kind of music. They just haven't heard them.
Yeah.
That's got to be that has to be it, because why else? It's not the music. There's nothing wrong with the music. It's just that exposure, like you were saying with the Motley Crue thing. I think that Y&T were constantly the victim of record company interference or non-interest or whatever, right? Because they delivered albums that were worthy of multi-million sales, but they just they're hit albums that aren't. You know what I mean? Like they had all the ingredients for a band that has, would be able to go out there and headline festivals now and not be special guests or not be second or third on the bill. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And you think of the catalog of the 80s, of their material. There's the A&M stuff, and then there's the two Geffen releases. And their sound was totally what was going on, and every time there was a little bit of a change in sound, they moved with it. They were kind of, I always remember there's a bunch of holy grail bands in the 80s of stuff that was a little bit harder to find. Y&T, Black and Blue, Rough Cut, and Keel. Those were they were the smaller level bands that you couldn't necessarily go to your store up the street and find.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that, to me, there was always this kind of mystique behind all four of those bands.
You raise a good point, because if you can remember this too. I miss the days when even your average department store had decent music sections.
Woolco,
Kmart, Zellers. Yeah. Man, the Zellers in Fredericton, which is about an hour away from me, I bought many a cassette tape there. I can still picture the music section. But you're right. A lot of those bands, there were no sections for them. You know what I mean? You might see something come in a shipment, but not necessarily. You pretty much had to go to Sam's or A&A's or, one of those chain places to find those lesser known bands. And the other thing with Y&T compared with the other bands you mentioned, Black and Blue and Keel, now those are bands that had 2 or 3 or 4 albums. Y&T had their catalog is bigger than I think most people realize. That they didn't just put out 3 albums in the 80s and then disappear. They've got a significant catalog. The trouble is that the majority of it is really obscure and really hard to find, and getting harder to find all the time. And you pretty much got to get it online. So I knew that after Unspooled, and then once I realized that, we could make a go of this, putting this through Amazon, I knew that the next book that I put out after Unspooled was going to be on one band. And I knew that band was going to be Y&T, because there's never been a book on this band, and they've been around since 1974. Every long-running band like that deserves this sort of treatment. Yes, you can go on the internet and find information, but there's no one source to find out about their albums and the songs on them and all of that. And I really wanted to do that. And this is a band that's never had a gold record, but they're loved all over the world, and they've got one of the biggest cult followings of any band I can think of.
You know what? It's funny about Y&T, because I recall back, I'm thinking mid-90s maybe, vinyl wasn't available anymore. So I went into a flea market, and they were selling vinyls, and then flea markets, wherever it was. And they're selling vinyls for like $2.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I got pretty well. I think I got Earthshaker, Black Tiger, Mean Streak, pretty well everything, all the A&M stuff except for the live EP.
Yeah.
At these flea markets, and I didn't have a turntable at the time, so they just sat for years, and they were in mint condition.
Yeah.
And I just held on to them until, and then eBay came along, and then I got all these Japanese versions of those albums from Japan on eBay. But like you said, they are hard to find. I don't have the two Yesterday and Today albums.
Yeah.
I've never been able to find them.
Rock Candy put them out, reissued them earlier this year on CD.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, but I don't know if they've sold out. That's the trouble with those rock, if you don't get them when they first come out. So, but that's the first time they'd been on CD since the early 90s. Yeah, those were really hard to find. Those took me forever to find on vinyl. And I actually, they are probably my two most prized 8-track possessions. I've got those first two Yesterday and Today albums on 8-track. And as far as I know, that's it, because I don't think there are any other albums on 8-track, even though it doesn't make any sense why A&M wouldn't have put Earthshaker or Black Tiger up, because they were still putting 8-tracks out like in stores at that point, because you can look and find they did ones for Styx and for 38 Special. So if a band was signed to a label, usually it was like commonplace that, okay, well, here's the 8-track version, but I've yet to see one. But needless to say, there's something about that I think that endeared them to me even more. It was I don't understand why this stuff is obscure. This is not avant-garde. It's not weird, like, stuff that only a few people would get. I mean, this is mainstream hard rock music. It's just that, it's not a name that broke through to the masses for some reason. So, yeah, it was hard won, but there was something very rewarding when you did track something, track them down. And they've been so consistent with their music too, that, Dave Meniketti is like a force of nature as far as being equally good at guitar and vocals. And, he's the last original member. He's the last one standing of the original lineup. They're still out there playing gigs though. And he still sounds pretty good as a vocalist, in his 70s, and his guitar playing is just, he's always been one of my favorite guitar players. He's got such a unique touch. I can tell when it's him playing, even if he's guesting on somebody's song. That's a Dave Meniketti solo. So yeah, it was a foregone conclusion that I was going to put that out, commemorate them with a book, because I think every classic band deserves that. And again, I've said this a lot. People have talked to me about, would you ever think about doing a Kiss book or a Rush book? I'm like, look, I love those bands. What am I going to say? What am I going to say that hasn't been said? I've got nothing to add. I've got no new angle to come at it with. I would rather write about bands that don't have many books written about them or don't have any.
You know what's funny, and I don't know if you know this, on Contagious, the song Temptation was written by
Bruno
Ravel, yep, and Al Pitrelli when he was still with Danger Danger. That song is actually available.
Yeah, I've heard that
on their rare cuts.
Yeah, somebody sent me an MP3 of their version of that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, there's lots of rabbit holes you can go down there too. But I mean, like, even after they signed to Geffen, that should have done it. Contagious should have been a hit. How that song wasn't a huge radio hit that summer of '87 is beyond me, because they just tapped into that sound. Taylor Rhodes is a good co-writer. Just bad luck, like, just kind of plagued them every step of the way. I don't know, Tyson, if you ever saw the documentary that they put out.
I haven't seen it. I haven't been able to find it.
It's I think it might still be available through the band's website, but I don't know how easy it would be to get into Canada now. But it's the best rock and roll documentary I've ever seen. I mean,
I have to see it. Amazon.com had it.
Yeah.
But obviously I couldn't watch it, right?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of this band. I learned a lot watching. There were things that I didn't know. Like, I didn't know that there were guys in the band before their first album that were different than the lineup that I always thought was the original lineup.
Yeah.
And that's just one small thing. There's tons of testimonials in there. I mean, Sammy Hagar's in there, Frank Hannon from Tesla, Eric Martin from Mr. Big, Bobby Blotzer from Rat, Don Dokken. There's tons of people talking about Y&T, which is really Fred Coury from Cinderella. Like it's
Yeah.
and it's just exceptionally well done. And yeah, it's one of those things where it's like if you didn't get it when it first came out, it's kind of tough. But but look for it on Discogs or eBay. See if somebody's selling one, because it is on with the show. It is one of the best rock documentaries I have ever seen.
And getting back to the Bruno Ravel point, his name is actually spelled incorrectly.
It was it's spelled
Ravelli or something.
Yeah, it's not spelled the way that. Yeah, no, I noticed that. I was thinking, oh, that's weird. Well, that's why it didn't click in originally who it was.
Right.
So
yeah, that's kind of a cool. It's like, oh, they used. I guess the Bruno actually explained to me how Y&T ended up doing that song is because of Jimmy DeGrasso was friends with with the Danger guys, and that's how that song ended up getting to Y&T. And I mean, that's a great song, and I think the whole Contagious album is. I still listen to it and think front to back, it's amazing.
Yeah, 10's my favorite. I think
10 is my favorite.
I think 10 is such a classy hard rock album.
Yes,
and
it definitely is.
So many potential hits were on there. It's just I go into it in a lot of detail in the book. Technically it's an album by album review, but it really talks about, like, I don't understand why this wasn't a hit. I don't understand why this wasn't a multi-platinum album. I do not understand. And a lot of blame is laid at the feet of A&M Records because they were not a hard rock centric label. And I think a lot of the times we're looking as fans for reasons why a band didn't break through, because it's not the music. The music is exactly what it needed to be. One thing that comes up a lot in that book is the fact that MTV went on the air in 1981 and they didn't do any videos, or weren't allowed to do any videos, until Mean Streak in 83 on their 5th album. So when MTV first went on the air in 81, they were desperate for video content because they only had so many videos to play, so they'd end up repeating. If they'd had videos from Earthshaker and Black Tiger, I know they would have gotten played because they just had to have the content. So there's 2 years where Y&T could have been recognizable all over the United States and places where they hadn't even toured. The example I always cite is look what the video for Bringing On the Heartbreak did for Def Leppard's High and Dry, because it wasn't selling big, so little by little they noticed as they were working on Pyromania that, oh, High and Dry is selling in Lowell, Massachusetts. We haven't even played there. What's going on? MTV's on the air in Lowell, Massachusetts. MTV. And that was a cheap, there's no big budget spent on that video, just soundstage videos. And that is all that Y&T needed to have A&M give them a little bit of money and say, lip sync 4 or 5 songs and we'll give them MTV. So yeah, it's like they were constantly behind and constantly playing catch up with bands that came out after they did, bands that opened for them and ended up bigger because they just,
Motley.
And I'm sorry, Y&T are the better band, always have been.
Absolutely.
But Y&T were not on Elektra Records. Elektra was a savvy label. Right. Elektra made platinum superstars out of Dokken. And I like Dokken, but my point is, you ask most kids today, no clue who Dokken is. Not one clue. They didn't have one song that charted higher than number 64 on the Billboard Hot 100, and yet they had 3 million-selling albums in a row.
That's crazy.
So that was Elektra. That was Q Prime Management. That was having all of those of those things lined up. Y&T did not have that. When they're out there busting their asses on the road, the record label's supposed to be doing the promo. The managers are supposed to be getting the best possible gigs, the best interviews, the best this, the best that. Didn't happen.
It's funny you mentioned Q Prime and Dokken. I mean, Q Prime was Metallica,
Def Leppard, Queensryche. Yeah, they and they could. It seemed like they could get things done for bands, right?
Yeah, and you think of like, you hope you have the best management.
Yeah.
But obviously, I mean, Y&T unfortunately didn't have that big powerhouse management agency.
And it makes these things make a difference. It's all of the behind the scenes mechanisms that is the difference. Because I mean, in Rock We Trust is Y&T's biggest album. And to put it into a Canadian perspective, I'm somebody that looks at this stuff all the time. I like looking through the old back issues online of RPM magazine, the charts. And In Rock We Trust is the only Y&T album or song, or I've never seen other songs that charted up here. It got as high as as 78.
Wow.
And that would explain why when I'm crate digging, In Rock We Trust is the record I see the most often. Probably followed by Mean Streak, but that would make sense. That and the same thing in the States. I mean, it was their biggest album. It got as high as number 46 on Billboard, and it's rumored to have sold around 450,000 copies, which is why I say if Universal Music re-audited or whatever they needed to do, it might be a gold record. But I mean, that's a great. That was a perfect record for 1984.
Oh, absolutely. And then you think it Down for the Count, which had Summertime Girls.
Yeah, Summertime Girls. There's no reason why that couldn't have been a top 10 single. Exactly. Only A&M could have had that stall at 55.
That's crazy.
A&M and RCA were like the worst labels for a rock or metal band to be on in the 80s.
And MCA. Apparently.
MCA were all right. They weren't quite as bad as those other bands, but yeah, you wanted to be on Atlantic or Elektra or Mercury,
Geffen,
or even Columbia, CBS. Like they were, or Geffen. If Y&T had been on Geffen from the start, or with it from Earthshaker on, could have been a totally different story. I don't know. I mean, look what that did for Sammy Hagar. None of his early albums on Capitol Records sold anything. He signs with Geffen, he starts selling gold and platinum albums, and it's not like his music changed all that much. It's just getting them out, them out there into stores and getting them visible, getting them on the end caps of aisles.
Exactly, and getting to that, I mean, the Sammy Hagar Red on Black, which is the listener's guide to Sammy Hagar. I was going to mention that because those Capitol years into the Geffen years. I seem to know the Geffen years a lot more than the Capitol.
There's a reason for that. Those Capitol albums are obscure, and I've joked. I mean, as far as rarity of completing a catalog, Sammy Hagar's early stuff is second only to Y&T as far as difficulty in finding all of the albums. Even just finding a copy of each album on something. Like I remember I found a couple of 9 out of 10 scale and Street Machine on cassette in 1993, and I was over the moon because I was like, there's songs on here I've never heard.
I remember going in the cassette era, going to Wolco and finding a compilation from Capitol. Yeah. For like $2.99.
Probably
it was called
Cruisin' and Boozin'.
Boozin'.
That is a truck stop tape. I call them truck stop tapes in my Red on Black book because they are record label released albums, but the artist had nothing to do with them, and they're just mixes of songs. There's another one in that period called Turn Up the Music, which I remember finding both of those at the same time, and for a long time that was it. That's all I could find for his studio output for Capitol Records. So, and I remember thinking, Y&T, I don't like it, but I understand it. At that time, like Sammy Hagar is the singer for one of the biggest bands in the world, and I can't find all of his albums. It doesn't make any sense.
It made no sense. And it was funny taking it home and listening to it because all I knew Sammy from was Van Halen at that point, right? I knew VOA, of course, because
Can't Drive 55, and that was a platinum album.
That was a platinum.
Yeah, his Capitol stuff was all over the place stylistically. All over the place.
It was very all over the
place.
And
that's why that was another book. I enjoyed doing that book too because I wanted people to know, first of all, just how many solo albums he had and how varied they were. And it's like, you're not going to get 10 songs of hard rock at all.
No. Didn't he do Dock of the Bay on one of his albums?
It was not an album. He put it out as a single by itself, and it eventually ended up on some compilations. But yeah, I mean, it's weird because Capitol Records, you'd think they would have known what to do with an artist like Sammy. I mean, they're the home of the beat.
Coming off of Montrose.
Coming off of Montrose. Well, that was the other thing. It's like, it's a shame he couldn't have landed on Warner Brothers. But yet, because he was at odds with Ronnie Montrose were still on Warner Brothers for a couple albums without him. Maybe that was why. But if he'd been on Warner Brothers from the beginning, it might have been different. But then again, things could have been very different from what I've read if they were thinking about having him be their singer from the get-go, which I'm glad it didn't work out that way.
I am
but
too. I mean,
yeah, the Red on Black that one was different because that was the first one that's entirely me. I wrote that entire book. That doesn't have panelists in it. I love doing both.
Okay.
But I had a lot I wanted to say about Sammy's solo stuff, and I kind of think I got it out.
You know what? It's funny talking about the Canadian thing, and maybe being on the East Coast, you may not have gotten this show, but Q107, which is a Toronto station, used to do a thing on Friday nights called The Power Factory with Joey Vendetta. So
I know the name Joey Vendetta for sure in Q107.
Right, exactly. So he had this thing called The Power Factory. So more or less at 12 o'clock every Friday night, it was everything that was new. This is late 80s, you'd hear the new Poison single. I remember hearing the premiere of Nothing But a Good Time on it. So anyways, one night, it was probably November 1988. He says, okay, this new band we're going to play and it was Bullet Boys.
Okay.
But they didn't play Smooth Up In yet. They played Kissin' Kitty. And he made reference, he's like, this sounds like Van Halen. And you heard it and you're like, yeah, that really has that, that Van Halen tone. And right after that, he played Bad Motor Scooter.
Oh, cool.
And it was so cool because I had never heard Montrose and didn't know that Sammy Hagar actually sang in this band Montrose, and hearing this song and thinking, wow, that's such a cool thing. And the songs back to back were kind of cool. Ted Templeman Productions.
Both Ted Templeman Productions, you're right. So my exposure to that, as I say in the book, I found a truck stop tape, but it was in New Hampshire when my parents were on family was on vacation in summer of '88. So I grew up in New Brunswick. So I grew up right on the border of Maine. So it was nothing to, I had relatives that lived in Maine. But anyways, I found this tape called Red Hot, and it's just like those ones you mentioned, except it's from his 2 live albums. It's just a mixture of songs. I'd never heard most of them before, except I was confused because it's got I've Done Everything for You, and I'm like, why is he doing a Rick Springfield song? I didn't know he wrote it. There's no credits inside these things. I had to learn all that
right.
stuff. But it had Bad Motor Scooter and Space Station Number 5. And I didn't know. I just thought, okay, those are Sammy songs. And it wasn't until I read in Hit Parader, they put out an issue, like the top 100 metal albums of all time. And that's where I first became aware of the band called Montrose. And it said containing Space Station Number 5 and Bad Motor Scooter and the then unknown Sammy Hagar. I'm like, okay, well, there's another, I got to look for that. And I found that cassette, and it's one of my all-time favorite albums. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And it's so ahead of its time.
So ahead of its time.
1973, I mean, that was heavy and well-produced. Like, it was really, really strong.
It definitely was. And the cool thing was that at that time, so you think 1988, a year later, Motley comes out with Kickstart My Heart with this bar thing at the beginning of the song, and we've already heard that, right?
Yeah, and Mick Mars has said he got that from the beginning of that song.
Yeah,
which is good because they don't know that band doesn't always admit to things.
No, they usually don't. I mean, especially if they steal anything, and we all know that.
Yeah.
But it's just, I mean, it's nice to talk about these stories. And as I was going through your book, like the segments of the books you had sent me, and reading your stories, and how our stories kind of intertwined because of all these, these antidotes of things that we recall from. And I think there's a lot of us like that, like this music, it's more than music.
Yeah.
It was,
in a pre-internet age, those little tidbits of information you would learn were everything, because there was no, you didn't have instant access to all of the information that you would want to know. You might find, I know there was a book that I took out from my local library. I don't know how many times. It was a sort of rock encyclopedia, but I think it was from 1981. It was fairly dated. It taught me a few things. That's when I first learned, for example, that Journey had 3 albums before Infinity and before Steve Perry joined the band.
Right.
So yeah, I was always on the hunt for not just music I hadn't heard before, but information about that music. And because I was buying cassettes back then, when I first bought that Montrose album, it was on cassette. It did not list a production credit. I had no idea who produced it. If I had known, I'd be like, this makes perfect sense, because everybody talks about Montrose being like the proto Van Halen, and it's like, yeah, okay, so here you have Warner Brothers, you've got Ted Templeman on production, band's named after the guitar player. Oh, and there's Sammy Hagar singing. So
Sammy Hagar singing. But it's funny, in Templeman's book, how disappointed he was that it didn't succeed the way he had hoped.
And the thing is, I think that, I mean, everybody that knows that album usually talks about it in sort of reverent tones, but the fact of the matter is that it was a flop in its initial release. It did not chart very high.
Yeah.
It sold steadily over the years. I think it took about 4 years to go gold and about 13 years to go platinum. So it was a real slow burn. But I think if that had been a success right out of the gates, Paper Money would have been a much better album. It wouldn't have been lighter than the debut. They would have kept that sound, because that sound was obviously working. But when it seems like a failure, that's why that album took me a long time to find, that Paper Money album, because I said, well, there is another album with Sammy singing. I want to hear it. And when I did get it, I'm like, wow, I can kind of see why I had a hard time finding this. It's just not as good. It's got moments. Yeah. But those memories where I got a lot of that stuff down in the books. I like doing that, because it's like, there's going to come a time when I'm going to forget all that. But it's like people, I'm glad that, it's nice to hear when people relate to that, because I read things and I'm like, I can picture, I was in a record store and I saw this album with great big snake on the cover and it said Mean Streak. Yeah. I can picture it. I can picture the whole thing, and just being so enamored with, I said, I got to buy that and put it on, and you like the album, and it's, nobody else seems to know about this band. This is my band. And so those are the kinds of stories I like working, and it's absolutely true. But those are significant signposts, because it's not, you can go on the internet and know, in seconds you can find something out. But when you had to really scrape and work for it, or, something unexpected happens and you find an old copy of Billboard or something and see something you didn't know that existed. And it's not just finding bands that didn't exist, but finding albums by bands that you didn't know existed.
Yeah, which is, it was always the biggest thrill, is those sort of things, right? Finding those albums that you're like, oh man, this is like how the heck did I find this?
They put an album up between here and here. I didn't know. You didn't know that. Like, I remember up till 1990, I didn't know about the Joe Perry Project, and I was a big Aerosmith fan. I had no idea. Never mind that he put out 3 albums while he wasn't in the band. I loved finding stuff like that out.
Those albums to me were elusive.
Yeah.
They were like,
and it's like, wait a minute, this is Let the Music Do the Talk. It's the same song, but the verses are different. Yeah. This is so weird. Why haven't I known? And this here again, we're talking about a big band. Why didn't I know their guitar player had this whole other career while he was out of the band? It's just weird stuff like that, but it sticks with you. You remember when you first found, wow, what is this? And you look at the cover, I'm like, well, that's Joe Perry. I'll have to get this, sight unseen, and without hearing any of it.
Exactly. And you think of the 80s, like I think of Whitesnake, when Whitesnake in 87, when they got big, and then they Geffen went back and released the whole, for most of they released
except
most
for
of
one,
the catalog,
except for one,
Ready and Willing.
Yep. I had the hardest time finding that until I thank God, I used to love the A&A dump bins, because I found an old Mirage Records version of Ready and Willing, and then I had all the albums on cassette. Yeah. But that's also where that same dump bin is where I found the first 2 Vandenberg albums, and that's another unsung band that I love.
So those are both of those, the Ready and Willing album and all 3 Vandenbergs, I found at those same flea markets.
Yeah.
I paid $5 for a vinyl copy on Mirage Records, which I still have all those.
Yeah, vinyl.
When
I first started buying vinyl, I mean, it wasn't like it is now. I was paying $2, $3, If it was a double album, maybe you'd pay $10. But
Exactly. And it's funny that you talked about you used to go over to Maine. I had a buddy whose parents used to go down to the States all the time. So he would make a list for them of tapes to bring home. And you mentioned Best of Vandenberg.
Yep.
That was one.
Yeah.
But he would record his favorite songs off them, and then he'd sell them to me. So I had the Best of Vandenberg.
Yeah, it was
back in the
that stuff. It was fascinating. Like a lot of the bands that were never that big up here in Canada that I wanted, the older stuff was always harder to find. Even though you find out years later, well, it did come out here. That you just don't see it that much.
You just don't see
one of the weirdest things that happened was in summer of 1990. I was into Maine. It was Bangor, actually, which is where Stephen King lives. People might know that, might think Bangor. I think, why do I know that name? Well, that's why. But I found this Journey cassette called Dream After Dream. Now, I thought I had all of Journey's albums at this point, including the first 3 Pre-Perry albums. But they did an album in 1980 after the Departure album and before Greg Raleigh left. That was the soundtrack to a film. They were commissioned to do it by CBS in Japan. And so it's the Departure era lineup. So Steve Perry's in the band. It's only got 3 vocal tracks on it. The rest of it's instrumental. And I had no idea that this thing existed. And I remember seeing it and going, was this the same band? And I looked at the cover. There's no information anywhere. I'm like, well, I have to take a chance and buy this. Come to find out it was them, but I didn't know. I did not know this album existed. It's just, it's like the forgotten album. It's very strange. So those are things like that I would find that I could not find up here.
Yeah. And well, now you just go on the internet and you can find out everything.
Right. But when you come across something like that, it was a real experience, because it's like your mind is blown. It's like, I thought I had all of this band's catalog, and here, this isn't just a compilation I didn't have. This is an entirely different bunch of songs that I've never heard before.
Yeah, and you know what? And I think of some of these reissues, for instance, that they're putting it on vinyl now. Like No Remorse released the 2 Quiet Riot albums about 3-4 years ago with Randy Rhoads, and I was so excited because I was disappointed a little because it's not as good as I had hoped, but it's still a part.
But you got to listen to it, right? You added it to it's like it's almost, it's like if you're missing something early like that, you're like, I don't care what it sounds like. I need to have all the albums by this particular whoever it is.
Yeah, and it's like White Lions, the first album,
right? Fight to Survive,
Fight to Survive. I have that. I've got that on vinyl, and I mean, I had the tape at one point, but it was just, I don't listen to it a lot, but it's in my collection, and I'm like, I have that first.
Yeah.
Or like I have a White Tiger album signed by Mark St. John.
I used to have that. I didn't think it was very good.
It's not very good. But you know what I did? I mean, it was signed by Mark St. John. I got it off the Kiss online site. I've never played it. I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to play this.
It's not very, you can, like, back.
I had it on CD.
It's funny because, a lot of those bands that came out, even if they didn't sell a lot of albums, they still ended up on a major label. So if you couldn't get a major label contract, you probably weren't very good.
Yeah, they were on EMC.
Yeah, it was some
small label.
Yeah, like they didn't even get on Shrapnel or Megaforce, or you know what I mean? Like they didn't even get to that level. So, and here's a guy that was in Kiss, so that tells you something.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I remember hearing it on CD for the first time and thinking, "Oh my God, I waited," because it was the reissue on CD.
Right.
It was probably 20 years later, and I was like, I waited 20 years to hear this. Yeah. It was very disappointing.
Yeah, right? Sometimes you wait and you're like, wow, this is like the hidden gem and whatever. And then sometimes you're like, I understand why this is obscure. It's just not very good.
It's just not very good. I mean, the songwriting wasn't there. It wasn't good. Now, one more. I mean, we haven't touched on the Kansas album review either. Are you a big Kansas fan?
Huge.
You must be.
Yeah.
Huge Kansas fan.
Yeah. That was a band where there have been books about them, and Kerry Livgren, their founder, wrote a book, but there was never an album guide. And I really like album guides, and I wanted to get panelists for this one. And so this I really, really enjoyed. Yeah, no, I mean the reason that my YouTube channel is called Tim's Vinyl Confessions is because Vinyl Confessions is a Kansas album. So I just think that they were a big band, and they've got two songs that most people that breathe oxygen know. I just think they should have been bigger. I think they were sort of like kings of the second tier of 70s classic rock. I think they should have been right up there with the best of the best as far as album sales go. And that's another band that's got way more albums than I think people realize, and way more stylistic shifts than people realize. I'm a huge fan of their 80s AOR period. That's when I got on board with that band. There's nothing really progressive about it. And so the versatility, also the fact that the last two albums that they've put out, in this century are two of their very best, and they're still putting out quality music. That really made me excited to put a book like this out, because I give just as much time to an album that came out on a small label as I do to a 4 million seller that came out on a big label. That's my approach.
Well, my ignorance on it is that I don't know enough Kansas. I mean, I know the songs that I hear on the radio, but I never got into it, where now I'm curious, because looking at the book and seeing all the albums, I was like, I had no idea. I knew they had probably had a long catalog because they've been around a long time, but I did not realize there was so much there.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. I mean, in the old days, bands would sign these long-term contracts that called for an album a year, so they just kept putting them out. And so over the years, that's how you end up with bands. Like Cheap Trick's a good example. Just tons and tons of albums. Great example. Tons of albums.
Oh yeah. And a new one coming.
Yeah. And so with Kansas, their 84 best of I've seen that used quite a few times on CD. That's a pretty good introduction. Yeah, if you listen to that and it doesn't do anything for you, I wouldn't bother going any further. But they aren't strictly a progressive rock band. There's touches of southern rock and boogie rock, and like I said, AOR, and they can rock really hard sometimes. And it's just, there was so much good stuff, and it's like not enough people know about, especially the latter day albums on the smaller labels. So yeah, that was another band that I really wanted to make sure got this sort of treatment.
Yeah, and I feel kind of bad, because I'm like, I wish I could talk more about Kansas, but now I need to go back.
Well, but you know what? That's the whole point, and that's why I found people that were big fans for the book. It's like to get the message out there. So if you're receptive to that, then my work is done. One of the most gratifying things that anybody says to me, and I get this a lot, and it doesn't matter what book they're talking about, if they come back to me and say, "Look, I was never a big fan of ... but now I read your book, and I just ordered 3 of their CDs on Amazon, or I just went out and I bought, their best of or whatever." That's great. Like it's spreading the word. That's all I've ever wanted to do, is spread the word about these bands that I love.
And that's amazing. And the last one is of course Night Ranger, which my story of Night Ranger didn't start until 2016.
Okay.
So I remember always, I knew who Brad Gillis was, Jeff Watson, and I knew who Jack Blades was, of course. But I never got into them for some reason. I just, I was into Motley and Bon Jovi, and I was into Queens, or I was in Van Halen, a lot of bands. But Night Ranger, for some reason, I don't know if it's because I never seen the albums to buy, but I think even at Wokel they had 7 Wishes. I mean, it was available. So 2016, I went to see Rick Springfield, The Romantics, and Night Ranger. It was in Coney Island.
Right.
In Coney Island.
Yeah.
So that night I bought the High Road album.
Yeah. Great album.
And I took I was like, I took it home. Joel Hoekstra plays on that one as well. And I took it home and I was like, this is incredible. Yeah. So then Don't Let Up came out after that. I bought that. And right up until ATBPO and the band played on, I got that. And then, of course, 40 Years and a Night, which I got that on vinyl, and it was incredible. That's
so cool that you got into them with the newer stuff. That's awesome.
Yeah. So then, of course, I go back and I find, like, this past April, I went to a record show, found Man in Motion and Big Life on vinyl.
Yeah.
So I picked those up, and of course I had somewhere along the way I did pick up Dawn Patrol and Midnight Madness, and I've also somewhere in California I found a new pressing. Yeah. Which was so cool. So I have quite a catalog.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, that's good. I mean,
of Night Ranger, right? And I have a Japanese pressing of Seven Wishes, which I found in a used shop. So it's funny that, you know, after all those years, I'm thinking, how did I not grasp onto that?
Well, I think we talk about that in the book. They were never really in your face, and they weren't like an image. And all those bands you mentioned were great, but they were really loud to look at, and they were in your face, and they were pushed all the time. Night Ranger were an easy band to kind of slide between the cracks, even though I think that they paved the way for a lot of bands that came after them to have harder rock songs on pop radio. You know, I think they just,
Absolutely.
You know, Jack Blades is just one of the best songwriters of the genre. He just can write a hook like nobody's business. And again, there's another band. Yes, their albums that they've put out in the 2000s have for the most part been really, really strong, really, really good.
Really
good.
Good.
So I think it's great that people are latching onto that latter-day stuff. And I wanted to make sure I mentioned every single one of their albums, including the one that the band doesn't even talk about these days, Feeding Off the Mojo, which is the one that Jack Blades isn't on. That came out in 95. That's one of those weird little anomalies that happens in bands sometimes when they have these long careers. It's like, I don't know, well, it's like the Motley Crue album. I compare it to the John Corabi Motley Crue album a lot because it's a good album, but it doesn't sound like who you think it is or who it's listed to be. But yeah, that's a band that was an early band that I latched onto as a kid because it wasn't sort of that scary heavy metal, you know what I mean? It wasn't like Twisted Sister or Motley Crue, but it had electric guitars and it rocked.
Yeah, and Brad Gillis has a style that is undeniable.
When you hear some of the whammy bar stuff that he does, it's like, he's really, I mean, just listen to the Hearing Aid Stars. You could pick Brad's part out a mile away, right? In the midst of all that guitar shredding, he just does that thing with the whammy bar, and to me, it's the highlight of the solo. Everything after that is a come down.
Exactly, and you know what? It's funny you mentioned that. I was going to mention that when we were talking Y&T. Dave Manketti's vocal part, you can tell is
front and center, and it's like that was the Hearing Aid cassette was something I found after I got into Y&T. I remember seeing the Stars video on Muchmusic, but I really didn't know everybody that was in it. But then when I found that cassette, I'm like, oh yeah, Dave sings on this, and you can pick him out plain as day. Plus it had, that cassette had the studio version of Go for the Throat, which I didn't have. That was another fun discovery, right? That's an album that desperately needs issued on CD.
I have it on vinyl. I have the vinyl.
I have the vinyl and the cassette, but it needs a CD reissue. It's only been on CD like once, and you're going to pay $200 plus for it on Discogs. Yeah, I think that Wendy Dio's been talking about reissuing it ever since Ronnie died, but I think there's too many different bands and too many different labels involved, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. I would like to see them do a Blu-ray of the making.
Yeah, the making of it. Yeah, I mean,
that's on YouTube.
It didn't get it certainly didn't get the attention that, say, you know, We Are the World or To Keep It Canadian, Tears Are Not Enough got, But yeah,
we all knew.
But yeah, we knew. But you know, those in the community knew about it. But it was like, yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing. It ties those two bands together. As a matter of fact, somebody said to me once, "Are you just going to do bands that are from the Bay Area?" I said, "Well, Kansas isn't from the Bay Area." But then I thought about it. Y&T, Night Ranger, and Sammy Hagar, they're all from the Bay Area. It just worked out that way. I said, "I'm in Eastern Canada. I just love these bands."
You're going to have to do Tesla now.
Love Tesla. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Tesla would be a good one to do.
Well, here's the thing. Like I said, every one of these classic bands deserves something that somebody can pick up and read, take it with them wherever they go, and have the if somebody's interested in getting into a band, saying, well, judging from what he says about this album, I don't think I'd like this one, but I think I might like that album. And if it's a particularly good compilation or live album, I will say this is as good a start as any. You know, like I've talked about this many times. If somebody asks me, like I've got, I've always been into Whitesnake from Slide It In Forward. what if I wanted to get into the older stuff? I say get Live in the Heart of the City.
Oh yeah, I have the European copy.
Me too, with the full, yeah, with the live at Hammersmith, yeah. But that's so cool. There's I want to entertain, there's humorous stuff in it, but I want to educate, and I want to educate people that maybe thought, okay, well, I thought this band had this many albums. No, they've got that many albums, and they're really good. And oh, by the way, they just put a new album out 3 years ago. You never heard anything from it on the radio, but it's good, so check it out.
Yeah. That's amazing. I have a Night Ranger question for you, actually. Did you find, okay, when I bought Man in Motion and Big Life and put them on, did you find that material was a good lead up to Jack Blades joining Damn Yankees? Because I found the material similar.
There's a song on Big Life called I Know Tonight, and if you take the synths out of that could be a Damn Yankees song. And there are several songs on Man in Motion that were only 2 years removed. I mean, things happened very quickly. Right. Night Ranger never broke up or went on hiatus because of any animosity. It was more frustration with MCA Records, because ever since Sister Christian was such a big hit, the record labels said, we need another one, we need another one, we need another one. All they wanted to put out were ballads, and but we're a rock and roll band. Yeah. So they put out what I actually think is their best album, Man in Motion. I'm a huge fan of that album.
It's a phenomenal album.
It was more guitar-oriented, less keys, even though there's still plenty of keys on it, and there's still plenty of melodic. And it flopped. It was a complete and total flop. And
it was an amazing
album. So I think that they just said, you know what, let's just, go our separate ways for a bit. So in no time at all, Jack found himself in Damn Yankees, and his writing didn't change all that much. So yeah, there's songs on Man in Motion that could definitely be on that first Damn Yankees album.
Yeah, and when I listened to it for the first time, when I put it on, I loved it, because I'm like, okay, this is a great cross going into because I love Damn Yankees. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, Big Life directly to the Damn Yankees album is kind of a whoa. But Man in Motion is the bridge album, and in more ways than one. I mean, it's another year closer, but it's also similar in style. It's very much guitar oriented. Although, I mean, there's songs on the Damn Yankees album with plenty of keyboards. A song like Runaway could have been on one of those two Night Ranger albums. So
exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure MCA would have loved to have a song like High Enough.
Well, that was a good, I think, vindication for Jack Blades, because Sister Christian, of course, I mean, it's their best known song. I think it's a great song. It's not, I never get sick of it. It's just, I'm one of those people that I think they've got like a dozen songs that should get as much play. I think they're one of those bands. They radio stations, they get their playlists and they whittle them down, they whittle them down, they whittle them down. But I think they've got several songs that should be radio staples. But Kelly Kagi, the drummer, sang Sister Christian. It became a hit.
Sister Christian, yeah.
So then they said, okay, we're going to put up Sentimental Street. That's, Jack wrote it, but Kelly sang it. And Goodbye from Seven Wishes, which Jack wrote. And it's a very personal lyric for Jack. It's about his brother that died of a drug overdose. Now we want Kelly to sing it. The inference was, you don't have a ballad voice. So when High Enough comes out and goes all the way to number 3, I know Tommy sings on it too, but Jack starts it off. And they sounded so well together,
their harmonies together.
But I think it was vindication for him. It's like, I guess I can sing a ballad and make it a hit. And now Night Ranger always does High Enough live. And they usually do Coming of Age.
That's cool. Yeah. And I mean, that was such an integral part of their sound, was those two guys in Damn Yankees, was Tommy Shaw and Jack Blades with their vocals.
If they didn't blend as well, I don't think they would have been one of those, groups that were thrown together but they couldn't write together. These guys proved that they were simpatico, writing and performing together. And it's really cool how Jack has always been in bands with another singer.
Yeah.
Actually, for that matter, so is Tommy.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. Now, I mean, getting to Brad Gillis, have you heard the new song he's on with Rick Hughes from
I have.
Sword
Oh, yeah.
Saints and Sinner? with Tommy Aldridge and
Yeah.
Rudy Sarzo. I thought that was really cool. And you know what? They did a great job of that song, which is The Real Me by The Who.
It's interesting because, and this is something that I was talking with my friend Mike Ladano about, because he interviewed Rick, and it didn't clue into me at first, because I remember that Rick had that band Saints and Sinners in the early 90s. Well, the keyboard player in Saints and Sinners was a guy named Jesse Bradman. Well, Jesse Bradman was in Night Ranger in the Man in Motion era. So there's another connection there.
Another connection.
Yeah, so what happened was their original keyboard player, Alan Fitzgerald, or most people just call him Fitz, he left after Big Life. So that's another reason why they're only pictured as a four-piece on Man in Motion. And one of the keyboard players that was hired for Man in Motion to play some of the tracks was this Jesse Bradman. He also ended up doing the tour, which ended up coming out as a live album called Live in Japan. But so Jesse somehow ended up in Saints and Sinners. So there are Night Ranger connections there. And that's another thing that leads back to watching Muchmusic and listening to the countdowns, is learning all of those rabbit holes that you can go down. Like, you know, just take the Deep Purple rabbit hole for getting into Whitesnake. Getting into Whitesnake, right?
Snake.
And then trying to sort out who was with who and who went on to who. You know, it's. I just think it's important to get that stuff out, so it's easily consumable. It's, you don't have to go on 6 different websites to do it, and it also serves its purpose as just a good read.
Exactly. I mean, the cool thing about the Whitesnake Deep Purple is you've got Black Sabbath and Rainbow, and that is all. That whole thing's intertwined in some way. Right?
It's interesting because, I mean, when Deep Purple was on hiatus, you had Whitesnake, you had Rainbow. They're still doing the colors thing.
Yeah.
And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend. I had him on my show. I highly recommend Steve McLean's book "Stealing Deep Purple," which is about Rod Evans, the original Deep Purple singer, like Posh.
Yeah, right.
In 1980, he put together a band, and they went on tour calling themselves Deep Purple.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know about this. It's one of those things that I had heard people tell me about, but I thought they were making it up until I heard someone else like, and then there's a little bit of footage on YouTube you can find. And it's in Steve's book. I know I'm promoting my book, but Steve's book, Stealing Deep Purple, is really, really good, and it's fascinating, especially like me if you're a Deep Purple fan. But even without that, it's a fascinating read because you just wonder, how did this happen, and how did this last for as many months as it did?
Yeah.
Nothing really.
Did Nick Simpler do it too?
No, and that's one of the weird things, because if he had, there'd have been more of a legal leg to stand. I don't want to spoil it, but it's a fascinating read, and there's more than a little bit of Canadian content in it.
Cool. Okay, I will check that out. That's amazing. That's a tidbit I had no idea about.
A lot of people don't. It was like, and the band doesn't even like to talk about it. I'm fascinated by it.
That stuff fascinates
But I've heard it said. You know who I mean by Chuck Klosterman? He's an author. He did a book called Fargo Rock City, and a few other things too. But he said, if you like a band, you're interested in the high points of their career. But if you love a band, you're interested in the low points. Like if you're a Kiss fan, you know all about, the success of the first Alive album and Destroyer and Beth being such a big hit. But if you're a huge fan, you want to know about The Elder and, and Unmasked and Creatures of the Night. You want to know about that dark period, right? So this is the type of thing, like most bands have that sort of period that, kind of came and went and tries to get swept under the rug. But
for me, it's finding songs that, like are B-sides or only released in Japan, and, like finding these obscure songs that people haven't, because a lot of the time you're like, why wasn't this left on the North American pressing? Because sometimes you end up with a gem.
Sometimes it's better than some of the album tracks that are on the standard versions. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
exactly. And it's crazy. Well, Tim, I have taken up a ton of your time, and I appreciate it. I
love a good discussion, man. And I hope people realize that this spirit of this is in the books, not just me, but the panelists that contribute. We're crazy about this stuff. We're passionate about it. And it's by the fans, for the fans. A lot of it is our opinions, but it does give you an indication of okay, this sounds like it's a heavier album. This sounds like it's not so much. Always make sure and list all the songs, the producers, and all of that stuff too. And Unspooled is a great coffee table book. It's full color all the way through. The rest of the books have color covers, but there's black and white photos. The black and white photos come out very, very well in that format. So, yeah, I appreciate you having me on to chat about them. All my books are available through Amazon, and all anyone has to do is type in my name, and they'll all come up.
Yeah, I mean, even what you sent me and skimming through it and looking at, like, seeing some of those albums on 8-track.
Right.
The way that they looked on 8-track was it's
a trip. Cool. Yeah, it's like, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense.
No, it's amazing. Well, I mean, I appreciate everything that you're doing, because you had reached out to me and I was unaware. So for me to know about the stuff, and I hope that you're going to do more, because these things are
absolutely.
I think it's amazing.
I'm going to keep on going with this.
Okay, and then if you do the next one or the next two or whatever, and you want to come on and we'll talk about more stuff,
awesome.
I have no problem.
I welcome the opportunity. I appreciate that.
Okay, man. Well, you enjoy your night, and we will talk again.